Boston Media Consortium Senate Primary Debate. I'm R.D. Saul from Boston University's College of Communication. You know, we have something rare in Massachusetts politics, an open U.S. Senate seat. Tonight, a chance to meet and hear the Democrats and Republicans vying for their party's nomination. This forum will be divided into two parts. We'll hear from the Republicans first, the Democrats second. Let's meet the three Republicans running in the April 30th primary. State Representative Dan Winslow, former U.S. Attorney Michael Sullivan, and businessman Gabriel Gomez. Gentlemen, thanks for being here tonight. A great opportunity to introduce yourselves to the voters of Massachusetts and to air some of the issues that are making headlines today. There are some time limits here. I'll explain them as I go through. No filibustering. Save that for the United States Senate if you get there. Let's talk about issues and have a good conversation tonight. This first section, 1 minute responses from each of you, and then 45 seconds for discussion. The Republican Party's post-mortem of the 2012 campaign said the words that characterized the party, and quoting now, scary, narrow-minded, out of touch, stuffy old men. Make the case to Massachusetts voters and independents in particular that you're not those people. Mr. Gomez, we'll start with you.
I don't need a 100-page PowerPoint to tell me what we need to do in our campaign to be more inclusive as opposed to exclusive, or to talk about what we support as opposed to what we're against, and to stress the Republican core principles, which are more personal responsibility, more personal freedom, and a smaller, more effective government. We've been doing that since day one in our campaign, going out to all the areas of Massachusetts, to the western part, the central part, the north, and the south shore, talking about the core principles of the Republican Party and why they resonate with the people that we're talking to. And that's what we've been doing since day one.
Mr. Sullivan, make the case you're not one of those stuffy old men.
Well, listen, I'm a Republican. I'm proud to be a Republican. I'm proud to be running as the Republican nominee in the Republican primary. You know, the people I'm talking to are concerned about issues around fiscal stability. They're concerned about issues as it relates to national security, and they're concerned about issues relating to energy. I think we connect with people best when we listen to them in terms of their concerns. I've had the opportunity to listen in the past, and as a result of that, had the opportunity to serve. I'm excited about going around and listening to people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Mr. Winslow, the postmortem on the GOP.
Sure, I'm proud to be a Republican, a member of the Party of Lincoln. The core founding principles of the Party of Lincoln, freedom and respect for individuals and opportunity and responsibility, these are principles that most Massachusetts voters agree with. They just don't associate them with Republicans anymore. The fact is that in America, the majority of voters for the next 30 years will be women and millennials and new Americans. And we have to show them that by reconnecting with who we are and what we stand for, that we're not the grand old party anymore, that scary party. We're the great opportunity party. And that GOP stands for growth, opportunity, and prosperity. And that's the promise of America that we bring to everybody in America, no matter who you are or from what walk of life you come from.
If one of you is elected, you have to try to work with Democrats. But if you're Massachusetts Republicans, can you work with Mitch McConnell? Mr. Gomez?
Absolutely. I could work with Democrats and Republicans, and I could work with Senator McConnell as well. You know, I was fortunate. I've got a very varied background. I'm a first-generation American. I learned Spanish first. I served in the military for over 9 years. And the most diverse organization in this country is the U.S. military. And my SEAL platoon, we had people from all different parts of the country with all different kind of views. And nothing ever got done. No mission was ever tasked or accomplished without getting the input from all the people and taking that into account and making the decisions based on input from different people, different points of view. And what we did was exactly what was right for the American people, and that's what we'll do when I go down to the U.S. Senate.
Okay, very quick responses.
Very, very comfortable working with anybody. I've spent my whole professional career doing that, both in the private sector and in government sector as well. It's something that people expect you to do as an elected member of government, is to find common ground for the purposes of best representing the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as well as our nation.
Dan Winslow, quickly.
So I've served our state as a judge for almost 8 years, as the governor's chief legal counsel during the last recession, and now as a state representative. And Scott Brown's old House seat, as well as 20 years in the private sector. I have a record of problem solving and reform and results, and you can't do that by yourself. You've got to be able to work with people of good faith. And that's what I've done throughout my career in the public as well as the private sector. I'm interested in solving problems. That's what we have to do as Americans. That's what we have to do to move forward, and that's what I'll commit to do if I'm fortunate enough to win the Republican nomination.
The Supreme Court of the United States has just wrapped up 2 days of oral arguments on same-sex marriage. California's Prop 8 yesterday, the Defense of Marriage Act today. I'd like to get you all on the record tonight about DOMA. Is it constitutional or not? Mr. Sullivan, we'll start with you.
Well, I think the United States Supreme Court is taking that question up. Obviously, they're in the best
What do you think,
position to do it in terms of making a decision. I'm a Federalist by heart. I believe things like the definition of marriage is best left to the democratic process. The process at the state level. Massachusetts has recognized same-sex marriages a decade ago. I'm in support of the repeal of DOMA, regardless of whether or not it's constitutional. I think people in Massachusetts that are recognized as married couples should all be afforded the exact same benefits.
Mr. Winslow.
Yeah, I believe that the government that is best is government that's closest to the people. It's most accountable and transparent to the people. And for that reason, I don't like to have federalized government where we can avoid it. I think it's a shame that the U.S. Supreme Court has to decide this issue because the Senate and Congress should decide this issue by repealing DOMA. I support the repeal of DOMA, and I believe in equality of marriage for all people in Massachusetts and the country.
Mr. Gomez.
I'm a firm believer in the 10th Amendment. I think that I'm against any kind of discrimination as well. I think that if two people are in love, they should be able to get married, irrespective. And I support repealing DOMA. I think that this should be decided on a state-by-state level, and I'm proud that Massachusetts was the first state to actually legalize gay marriage, and 8 or 9 states have followed suit, including the District of Columbia. So I hope the Supreme Court repeals DOMA.
So you would keep this at the state level. What about any constitutional rights for same-sex married couples at the state level? Can a state say, we're not going to recognize it?
Well,
How do you have any consistency?
Well, I start from the premise that marriage is best defined by the state. From my Federalist principles, it's the democracy works best when there's an engaged citizenry. And each states traditionally have been able to define marriage, and that's where it works best is a definition by states to make those determinations. That's where significant social policies are best left to be decided at the state level.
Dan Winslow.
So I think that this goes to the core values of who we are, equality and freedom. And I think that if one of us is not equal, then none of us is equal, that we have to work to make all of us free and equal throughout American society, regardless of who you are or who you love. And if I were fortunate enough to earn the vote of the people of Massachusetts and the Republican Party and independents who can vote, as well as ultimately in the June election, I would work to make sure that those principles were followed throughout my time in the Senate.
Hey, Mr. Gold.
This is a state issue, and this is actually coming up on the Prop 8 that's in front of the Supreme Court as well. You know, the people of California spoke. And while I don't agree with what they did, you need to respect what the states decide on a state-by-state issue. And that's going in front of the Supreme Court as well.
Well, it's not clear to me where Mr. Winslow's position is on it. I'm not sure if he's saying he's in favor of states making these decisions or it should be left up to the federal government to define marriage.
Well, I'm not sure of Mr. Sullivan's position on marriage from what he said, because I support equality of marriage for all persons in Massachusetts and throughout the country. And I want to be clear about that. Mr. Sullivan wants to have government intrude into the personal lives of people and something that is so personal about who they get to marry, and I disagree with that, respectfully.
Mr. Gomez, you want to check in on that?
No, look, I'm very clear on where I stand. I'm against any kind of discrimination. I think that if two people are in love, they should be able to get married. It should be decided on the state level, and I'm for repealing DOMA. And I respect the decision that the people of California made, but that's in front of the Supreme Court. Okay. But I'm against any kind of discrimination.
The debate on taxing and or cutting our way to a balanced budget focuses on entitlement programs, things like Social Security, like Medicare. What's your prescription for cleaning up the balance sheet? How do we save these programs? Mr. Winslow, we'll start with you.
Sure. First of all, Social Security is the most successful domestic program in the history of the United States. It's an old house, it needs renovation, but we have to make sure that we preserve the house. And for that reason, in anything that we do, I will commit that anyone who is already receiving Social Security, that anybody who's 55 or older, who's on the cusp of qualifying for Social Security, we have to ensure that that is safe for those people. But we also have to make sure that Social Security is available for future generations, for people right now who are in their 20s or 30s, and we have to make sure that the system is balanced. I believe that we need to have something similar to the Base Realignment Closing Act. That Congress is incapable, it seems, of making complicated actuarial decisions, and I would propose a bipartisan commission to present to Congress for an up or down vote the actuarial fix, that is to make Social Security solvent again so that it's a promise that's kept to all American people.
Mr. Gomez, your prescription for Social Security and Medicare.
The first thing we need to make sure is that the promise is kept to the people that are currently receiving these benefits and those approaching those benefits as well. I do think that there is a lot of ideas out there that have been discussed that have bipartisan support. What we have down in D.C., unfortunately, is we just have a lack of courage to tackle those issues. I think some ideas that I would support are means testing. I would argue that Warren Buffett probably doesn't need this full benefits on Social Security. And I think also you can have a slow increase in the retirement age. You can increase the age by a month per year for 24 years, and you'd increase it by 2 years over a 24-year period. These are proposals that have been out there, have bipartisan support, and more importantly, have the support of the people of Massachusetts and the American people. What we have, unfortunately, is a lack of courage for people to actually tackle these issues.
Social Security, Medicare.
Well, first and foremost, I would not defer my authorities and responsibilities as an elected member of the United States Senate to a non-elected commission. I think that's the duty and responsibilities as a senator, and I would be willing to stand up and make some of those difficult and challenging choices. I think saving Social Security really starts with a budget, with a budget that's passed by the United States Senate that's reasonable and begins to address these huge deficits that have been accruing over these last several years and this enormous debt. The budget that was recently passed by the United States Senate was 4 years in the making, and quite candidly, it wasn't worth the wait. It proposes $3.7 trillion worth of spending and $1 trillion worth of additional tax revenue. That does not make sense. So as long as you have these continued deficits growing and this huge debt, Social Security and Medicare will continue to be at risk.
Mr. Weasley.
Well, there's two funds in Social Security. There's the retirement fund that we're just talking about. There's also the disability fund. 20 years ago, the trustees of Social Security warned that in 2016, the disability fund would become insolvent. Ed Markey was there for every one of those 20 years, and Steve Lynch was there for at least half of them. And do you know that in 2016, the disability fund is going to be insolvent? What have they done about it? That's going to be resulting in a 20 to 25% reduction in all disability payments. That's wrong and it's unconscionable, and that's why Washington isn't working. We've got to get those guys out of there.
Let me clarify one thing. You're for means testing these programs. What about it? Means testing Social Security?
See, I think that we need to. I think that means testing is something that should be on the table. But my concern about it is it's not a welfare program. It's an insurance program, and people should pay into it and get the benefit of their bargain.
Yep. Yes or no?
No, the means testing should not be required. Certainly wealthy people can make a determination as to whether or not they want to decline the benefits or they want to give those benefits to some charitable cause. But means testing, I don't think is the appropriate way, and it's not going to save Social Security.
All right, let's move on. President Obama signed the health care bill into law 3 years ago this month. Do you favor repeal of the Affordable Care Act? What's wrong with it? What's right with it? Mr. Gomez, we'll start with you this round.
I think the overall theme of Obamacare was right. Universal health care coverage to have more access at affordable and quality health care. Now, I don't think he went about it the right way at the federal level. I think this should have been at the state level, just like we did here in Massachusetts when Governor Romney was governor. So I would favor repealing Obamacare, but I don't think that's probably going to be feasible. What I would favor, though, is having given the states the waivers they're going to require in order to have to actually formalize with the Medicare or with Obamacare. And so as long as it doesn't raise any taxes, I'm for the waivers that the states are going to require.
Mr. Sullivan.
I'm absolutely in favor of repeal of Obamacare. It makes no sense at all. The things that we like about healthcare in our country is the access and the quality of care that we receive. The thing we don't like about healthcare in our country is the cost. The one problem we didn't like, Obamacare didn't fix. Costs are going up significantly. I speak to small businesses around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and they're getting this huge tax increase as a result of Obamacare. The two things we like best about healthcare, quality of care and access are going to continue to decline based on the way that they provide reimbursements to the providers. Fewer and fewer people are going to be excited about entering the healthcare profession as a result of the limitations that are being put in under Obamacare. I think Obamacare should be repealed. The fact of the matter is people that are poor and uninsured have access to the quality of care, and they have access to good doctors.
All right, Dan Winslow.
Obamacare was bad for Massachusetts. We didn't need it. We had already solved the issue of quality care and access to care here in Massachusetts. And Obamacare simply layered on federal bureaucracy. It took our government away from the state where it's accountable to the federal government, where those K Street lobbyists are going to be running roughshod over our rights. It imposed taxes on all of us. It's not affordable. And it also imposed taxes on our medical device industry, which is going to cost us jobs in Massachusetts. I've proposed something called Excel and Exempt. If a state has met the level of excellence, that the federal government has specified, the state's automatically exempt from Obamacare and automatically exempt from all of the taxes of Obamacare. And next week in the House of Representatives, I proposed a plan for the state plan to reduce the cost of health care for all people in Massachusetts, individuals and families, by 25%. It's called Mandate Light. I'll be testifying on it next week in the State House of Representatives.
I want to come back to this if time permits, but I want to move on to the next section of our forum this evening, and that's candidate-to-candidate questions. The way this will work, brief question, 1 minute to answer, quick follow-up question if you want, and a rebuttal. We'll start with Mr. Sullivan to Mr. Gomez.
Great, thank you. Gabriel, every time that you mention you're a first-generation American and you served in the Navy, I think of my father. Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, Mike. It was an honor. It was an honor.
In all the work you've done, can you describe the largest budget that you've had to manage? And I'm not talking about your household budget. I'm talking about a budget in the private sector that you've had to manage, and the amount of cuts that you've had to make in a budget that you had to manage.
Sure. I mean, in the private sector, in the industry that I was in, we invested in a lot of companies. They were small, medium, and large. Companies as large as $2-3 billion in revenue. I sat on the board. We're responsible for the budget of that board. We're responsible to make sure that that company grows and be successful. So as a board member, we were responsible for managing that budget of over $3 billion and also managing to make sure that the company was operating effectively and be able to grow and be successful.
Other than on a board, did you have an opportunity to manage any budgets at all?
What I have to offer is I've had a lot of leadership experience. I served 9 years in the military as a Navy pilot and as a Navy SEAL. I have 16 years in the private sector, actually helping companies grow and be successful. What we've heard consistently on the campaign trail is that people don't want somebody who's been in politics for a good part of their life. They also want somebody who has actually had experience helping companies grow and be successful, understands how the economy works, understands what the impediments from the government coming down, why companies are right now not hiring, why they're not investing in their people, and why they're not investing in their company, why there's too much uncertainty. That's what I have experienced, and I've got a leadership experience, and I've been effective my whole life.
All right, our half hour is flying away. Mr. Gomez to Mr. Winslow.
Sure. I'm not here to ask questions of my fellow candidates to try to tear them down or to put them on the spot. However, I do have questions for Congressman Markey and Congressman Lynch that are outside.
You have to run against these two fellows first.
I understand. But I think that the people of Massachusetts want answers to: do Congressman Markey and Congressman Lynch actually favor the budget that just came out of the Democratic Senate that never balances and has $1 trillion in tax increase?
You'll have a chance to ask them that question if you're the nominee of the Republican Party.
Dan,
do you have a question for Mr. Winslow?
Sure. Dan, do you think Congressman Markey and Congressman Lynch should have to actually answer the question of whether or not they support the Democratic budget that just passed through the Senate for the first time in 4 years, where it never balances and it has $1 trillion tax increase? And do they really think that in today's economic recovery that it's the right thing to do to raise taxes?
Gabriel, I guarantee you that Steve Lynch and Ed Markey would have voted yes for $1 trillion tax increase, and until they say otherwise, that's my position. And the fact of the matter is that vote was 50-49 in favor. If I were in that U.S. Senate, I would have been the vote that turned it the other way around, 50-49 against, to be able to have our taxes spent wisely and well and to get the federal budget under control. So speaking on behalf of Ed Markey and Steve Lynch is not within my capability because I don't understand them. But what I do understand is that we're not going to change Washington by sending the same entrenched Democratic congressman down to Washington only in the Senate this time, and expecting a different outcome. It's just not going to happen. We need to get one of us, and by the way, any one of us is better than either one of them. I just hope that I'm the one that earns that right from the Republican primary.
Let's stick with the Republican primary. Mr. Winslow to Mr. Sullivan.
Mike, as I've gone around the state, I hear time and again from families and taxpayers and individuals how worried they are about the federal deficit. It's a drag on our economy. It's something that is going to be a drag on future generations. What are 3 specific things, if you're elected, that you would do to reduce the federal deficit in the United States?
Well, as we know, the federal deficit has continued to grow under the Obama administration. What a lot of people don't realize is prior to this administration, there were only 2 years in the history of our nation that the annual deficit exceeded $400 billion. Since this administration came into office, those annual deficits are close to $1 trillion. And the budget that the Senate just passed adds additional deficit and additional debt. We're accrued to about $23 billion. I'd start with waste. And we know that there's tremendous waste in the government. The Government Accounting Office suggested that somewhere between 3 and 5% of federal spending is lost to waste. I mean, the fact of the matter is our senators are careless with regards to being good stewards of the taxpayer's purse. And as a senator, I would be vigilant in terms of identifying all that waste in the federal government.
Dan, follow up?
What are the other 2? What are the other 2 specific proposals to reduce the federal deficit?
Well, I think you're going to have to reduce spending across a number of the departments. I did it, Dan, when I served there. I served in the Department of Justice in senior leadership positions. We were called upon to reduce our budget on several occasions, particularly to support the war effort. And we did it gladly. It didn't affect the overall mission of the agency. The one area I would not cut is I would not cut any funds that would put any of our men and women in uniform in peril. They obviously doing a very important mission, and their safety and security is critically important.
All right, let's move on. We'll go back to our earlier format, a question, 1 minute for each of you, and a little time to mix it up. The topic is abortion. The 2012 Republican platform says, and I'm quoting here, "The unborn child has a fundamental individual right to life which cannot be infringed. We, the Republican Party, support a human life amendment to the Constitution and endorse legislation to make clear the 14th Amendment's protections apply to unborn children." Do you agree with your own party's position, Mr. Sullivan?
Well, I'm pro-life. Certainly I've been pro-life my whole life. I don't recall a time that I wasn't pro-life. The only time people were curious or interested in my position is when I decided to run for public office. I think as a nation, we respect life, and I'll do whatever I can, obviously, to protect life. It's not lost on me that the fact of the matter is there are 2 lives involved. It's the woman's life and it's the unborn child's life. And I think as a country, we have to do everything we possibly can to support women that sometimes find themselves in a situation that they think is a crisis, to make sure that they're getting all the education, information that they need to make the best decision that they can make. And we also have to be supportive, I believe, of changes in the adoption process to streamline it so that people in our country are able to adopt as easily as they're able to adopt foreign-born children.
Let me just follow up quickly. Does that statement from the platform reflect your views as a Republican?
Well, you've read it. I haven't read it, R.D.
It's pretty straightforward.
Well, I think we have, I'm sorry?
It is what it is.
Well,
you agree with it or don't?
I think we have to be practical in terms of solutions. And the fact of the matter is a constitutional amendment requires a 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress. We can't get 2 members down there right now to agree on which day of the week it is. It requires a 3/4 vote by the states. I mean, that's the democratic process.
Okay.
The likelihood.
We've got 5 minutes left in the half hour. Mr. Winslow, just same question.
Yeah, I'm a big tent Republican when it comes to social issues. I'm pro-choice. Roe v. Wade is the settled law of the United States, and I support a woman's right to choose. But for me, it's a very personal decision, and for that reason, consistent with my view of a limited role of government. The decision whether or not to have that procedure, an abortion, is a question for a person's conscience, her faith, and her family. And those are 3 areas into which I believe the government, a limited government, has no business being. That said, I believe that in the Republican Party, we have to focus on those things, those many more things that unite us. Jobs, the economy, the deficit and the debt, not those few things that divide us, because I think people of good conscience can agree to disagree on some of those issues. For me, if I'm fortunate enough to be in the Senate, I will always stand in support of a woman's right to choose.
Mr. Gomez.
I'm Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I'm personally pro-life, but I'm not going down to D.C. to change the law. You know, Roe v. Wade was settled 40 years ago. It's settled law in Massachusetts. Justice Scalia, a very conservative justice, has effectively said that it's established law, and I agree with him. Now, however, I do not support late-term abortion. I think that you should have parental consent. And this is one of those issues where I think the American people, when I go out there and talk to the American people, they're not talking about abortion. They're talking about the economy. They're talking about the $16 trillion in debt and how we're going to fix that, how we're going to get companies that have so much uncertainty that they're not invested in themselves, they're not invested in their people, and they're not, more importantly, investing in hiring people. That's what people are worried about right now.
Okay. We've got 3 minutes left in our half hour. I want to get at least one foreign policy defense-related question. Iran is believed to be developing nuclear weapons. North Korea has them. Is there a tripwire in each of these cases that warrants American military action? Dan Winslow will start with you.
The greatest threat to the Iranian theocracy are the Iranian people themselves, and I think that we have to increase the sanctions and also not lose opportunities like we lost in 2009 when there was the start of an uprising against the theocracy. I think we need to make sure that the Iranian people are empowered to take back their country. But ultimately, I believe there should be no daylight between the United States and Israel on these issues that we will not tolerate. And I know that Israel will not tolerate a nuclear weaponized Iran. It's bad for the United States.
Mr. Gomez.
Israel's our closest ally. We need to do everything we can to support and protect Israel. And in terms of, is there a tripwire? Israel should have the green light to do whatever it needs to defend itself. Now, whether Iran has nuclear capability, but I think more importantly is whether they've actually got the ability to actually protect themselves so that they're actually immune from an attack. If they get to the point where they can actually protect their weaponization, then I think that's a tripwire to actually give Israel the necessary means and the green light to do what they need to do to defend themselves.
Mike Sullivan.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, there needs to be a tripwire, and I'm confident that there is a tripwire. I suspect there's a tripwire that is put in place by the Israel, and it should be. I've had the opportunity to do work with counterparts in Israel during my national security work, and the fact of the matter is they have to make sure that their national interest is protected. And as our greatest ally in the world, we have to make sure that we support them in every measure as well.
Let me get in just one very quick one. Ben Bernanke's term is up in 2014. Does he warrant another one? Start here.
You know, I think that's up to in the Senate to confirm.
It's up to you if you're in the Senate.
You know,
does he deserve another term?
I'd like to see somebody different in there.
Yeah, I would say no. I mean, we're not on a good path, and the economy continues to struggle. So I would say no.
Yeah, I would say no, and I'll post on danwinslow.com next week the reasons why.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much. That's the first half of our Senate primary debate this evening. Our thanks to Republicans Dan Winslow, Michael Sullivan, and Gabriel Gomez. Coming up next, second half of our debate this evening, we'll meet the Democratic candidates. We're back with them. More questions, more answers, more policy issues to discuss. The Senate primary debate, the consortium debate continues.